The deafening crack of thunder sent Penelope Porter's heart racing as she stood in disbelief at the empty stable, rainwater seeping through her threadbare cotton dress. Her family's wagon had disappeared over the horizon less than an hour ago, leaving behind nothing but wheel tracks that were quickly washing away in the downpour. At 22, she had never imagined they would actually abandon her in Wyoming Territory, 1876, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small carpet bag containing her few possessions. "They really did it," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned by the rain hammering against the stable roof. "They really left me." The argument with her stepfather had been brewing for weeks as they made their way west from Illinois. His plans to marry her off to the elderly shopkeeper in the next settlement, a man 3 times her age with yellowed teeth and wandering hands, had been the final straw. When she'd refused, Thomas had given her an ultimatum: agree to the marriage or find her own way. She hadn't believed he would actually leave her behind, especially not without Maple, the chestnut mare she'd raised from a foal, but he had taken everything, including her beloved horse. The empty stall where Maple should have been standing seemed to mock her now. Penelope wiped away tears with the back of her hand. The stable offered little protection from the elements, and night was falling quickly. She had no money, no horse, and no prospects in a town where she knew not a soul. Silver Creek was little more than a dusty outpost with a general store, a saloon, and a handful of weathered buildings strung along its single street. A gust of wind blew the stable door wide open, causing Penelope to gasp as cold rain pelted her face. She rushed to close it, struggling against the force of the wind, when a large hand appeared beside hers, effortlessly pulling the door shut. "Didn't mean to startle you, miss," came a deep voice from behind her. Penelope whirled around, instinctively backing away from the tall stranger. His broad shoulders nearly filled the doorway, water dripping from the brim of his dark hat onto a worn leather duster. Despite the dim light, she could make out a strong jawline peppered with stubble and eyes that seemed to assess her situation in a single glance. "You all right?" "Ain't safe for a lady to be alone in here with this storm brewing like it is." "I'm fine," she lied, straightening her back and lifting her chin, unwilling to appear as vulnerable as she felt, "just waiting for the rain to pass." The stranger looked pointedly at her small carpet bag, then around the empty stable. "Waiting with your baggage, but no horse," one eyebrow rose skeptically. "That's a peculiar way to travel in these parts." Heat rose to Penelope's cheeks. "My circumstances have changed unexpectedly." "I see." Though his expression remained neutral, something in his eyes softened. "Name's Dawson O'Malley. I've got a room at the boarding house, and Mrs. Fletcher might have space for another lodger if you're in need." "I haven't any money," Penelope admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. Dawson studied her for a long moment. "Well, Miss Porter, Penelope Porter, Miss Porter, I reckon Silver Creek's a rough place to be without funds or friends." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I don't make a habit of prying, but it appears you might be in some trouble. Your family in town," the question brought a fresh wave of pain. "They've moved on without me," understanding dawned on his face. "Left you behind, did they?" When she didn't answer, he nodded as if her silence confirmed everything. "They even took my horse," she finally whispered, the betrayal cutting fresh. Dawson replaced his hat and moved toward the stable door. "Let me speak with Mrs. Fletcher." "Storm's getting worse and you need proper shelter for the night. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." "Why would you help me? You don't know anything about me." His mouth quirked into something not quite a smile. "I know enough to see you've been dealt a poor hand. My ma would turn in her grave if I left a lady stranded in a storm." He paused, then added, "Besides, I've been without a horse in bad country before. It's not a fate I'd wish on anyone." Before she could respond, he opened the door and gestured for her to follow. "Come on. It's only getting darker and the boarding house is warm." Hesitantly, Penelope gathered her carpet bag. Every instinct told her to be wary of strange men offering help, but the alternative was spending the night in a leaky stable with an empty stomach and no plan for tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. O'Malley, she said, stepping past him into the rain. Just Dawson, he replied, shielding her slightly with his duster as they hurried down the muddy street. And don't thank me yet. Mrs. Fletcher can be particular about who she lets rooms to. The boarding house was a two-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Despite its weathered appearance, warm light glowed from the windows, and the scent of cooking food drifted out to greet them. Mrs. Fletcher proved to be a stout woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked Penelope up and down with undisguised suspicion. "I don't run that kind of establishment," she said firmly after Dawson explained the situation. "I've a reputation to maintain." "Mrs. Fletcher," Dawson said, removing his hat respectfully, "Miss Porter is a lady who's fallen on hard times. I'll vouch for her character and cover her board until she finds her footing." The landlady's eyes narrowed. "And what's your interest in this arrangement, Mr. O'Malley?" "Common decency, madam, nothing more." After a long moment of consideration, Mrs. Fletcher nodded curtly. "Very well, but separate rooms opposite ends of the hall and no funny business. I'll expect payment at week's end." "Yes, madam," Dawson agreed, relief evident in his voice. Penelope felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. I promise I won't be any trouble. See that you aren't," the older woman replied, but her expression softened slightly. "Now come in and get dry before you catch your death. There's stew left if you're hungry." Later, dressed in borrowed nightclothes and with a warm meal in her stomach, Penelope sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a small but clean room. The storm continued to rage outside, but for the first time since watching her family's wagon disappear, she felt a flicker of hope. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it cautiously to find Dawson standing there, hat in hand, keeping a respectful distance. "Just wanted to make sure you're settled," he said. "And to let you know I'll be heading to the livery at first light. The owner, Hank, might have work. He mentioned needing help and I could put in a word for you." "That's very kind," Penelope said, "but I don't know the first thing about working at a livery." "Do you know horses?" "I've had one since I was 12, raised her from a foal." Dawson nodded. "That's enough to start with. Rest is just learning as you go." He hesitated before adding, "I'll be moving on in a week or so. Got business in Cheyenne. But that should be enough time to help you get established here if that's what you want." The thought of being alone again sent a flutter of panic through her chest. "I appreciate any help you can offer, truly. We'll figure it out," he said with a certainty that was oddly comforting. "First light, then. First light," she agreed. As he turned to go, Penelope called after him softly, "Mr. O'Malley Dawson." He paused, looking back. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Something unreadable passed across his features. "Get some rest, Miss Porter. Tomorrow will be a new day." As she closed the door, Penelope leaned against it, listening to his retreating footsteps. A stranger's kindness in a moment of desperate need, it seemed almost providential. She wasn't naive enough to think there wouldn't be challenges ahead, but for tonight, at least, she was safe, warm, and no longer completely alone. Outside, the storm continued to batter Silver Creek, but within the walls of the boarding house, Penelope Porter slept soundly for the first time in weeks, unaware that her life had just changed course as surely as the lightning that split the Wyoming sky. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the thin curtains of Penelope's room. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, realizing that she had overslept. First light had come and gone. Hastily, she dressed in her wrinkled gown, the only one she possessed, and arranged her honey-brown hair as neatly as possible without proper pins. When she descended the stairs, she found Mrs. Fletcher in the dining room, clearing away breakfast dishes. "Good morning," Penelope said hesitantly. "I'm afraid I've slept later than intended." Mrs. Fletcher looked up, her expression softening slightly at the sight of Penelope's disheveled appearance. "Mr. O'Malley said to let you rest." "He's been gone these 2 hours already, said he'd return by midday." She gestured to a plate she'd kept warm by the stove. "There's still some breakfast if you're hungry." "Thank you." Penelope gratefully accepted the plate of biscuits and bacon. Did he mention where he was going? To the livery, and then to speak with Mr. Thompson at the general store, something about finding you suitable attire for working with horses. The older woman hesitated, then added, "Girl your age, pretty as you are, ought to be looking for a husband, not mucking out stables." Penelope's grip tightened on her fork. "My last prospect for marriage was a man of 60 with wandering hands. That's why my family left me behind, because I refused him." Mrs. Fletcher's eyebrows rose, but after a moment she nodded with grudging respect. "Well then, perhaps the stables aren't such a bad alternative after all." She hung her dish towel neatly and added, "When you're finished eating, I could use help with the washing. Might as well earn your keep while you're waiting." Penelope spent the morning up to her elbows in soapy water, scrubbing sheets and towels before hanging them to dry in the bright Wyoming sun. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her thoughts, which kept returning to her uncertain future and to the enigmatic cowboy who had appeared just when she needed help most. Shortly after noon, the sound of hoofbeats announced Dawson's return. Penelope looked up from the laundry tub to see him dismounting from a sturdy buckskin gelding. Behind him, he led a second horse, a dappled gray mare with intelligent eyes and a white blaze running down her face. "Miss Porter," he called, removing his hat as he approached, "I've got news." Penelope wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. "Good news, I hope. That depends on your willingness to work hard," he replied with a slight smile. "Hank at the livery says he can use your help starting tomorrow. Pays not much, but it'll cover your room and board." He gestured toward the gray mare. "And this is Willow. She's yours to use while you're working at the livery." Penelope's eyes widened as she moved closer to the horse. "Mine, but how? She belongs to Hank," Dawson clarified. "He's lending her to you as part of your employment. She's gentle but spirited, seemed a good match." He watched as Penelope cautiously approached the mare, who nickered softly and nudged her hand. "She likes you already." "She's beautiful," Penelope whispered, stroking the horse's velvety nose. The familiar smell and warmth brought a lump to her throat as she thought of Maple. "I also spoke with Mr. Thompson," Dawson continued. "He's agreed to provide you with some suitable work clothes on credit to be paid from your first wages." He cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Thompson helped select them. I thought it best to have a woman's opinion on such matters." Penelope was overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks, just trying to set things right." Something in his tone made her wonder what he meant, but before she could ask, he added, "I thought we might ride out this afternoon, let you get acquainted with Willow and see a bit of the countryside. If you're amenable, that is." "I'd like that very much," she replied, surprised by how much she meant it. An hour later, dressed in a borrowed riding skirt from Mrs. Fletcher, Penelope rode beside Dawson along a trail that wound through golden prairie grass and clusters of cottonwood trees. The vast Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above them, scattered with puffy white clouds that cast moving shadows across the landscape. Willow responded beautifully to Penelope's commands, and the familiar rhythm of riding brought a sense of peace she hadn't felt since before her family's betrayal. "You sit a horse well," Dawson observed. "Seems you weren't exaggerating about your experience." "Maple my horse back home and I practically grew up together," Penelope replied, the memory bittersweet. "My father gave her to me before he died. After my mother remarried, Maple was my only real friend." She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "I can't believe they took her from me." Dawson was quiet for a moment. "Family can be complicated," he finally said. "My own father and I haven't spoken in 15 years. What happened?" Penelope asked, then quickly added, "I'm sorry, that's too personal a question." "It's all right," he assured her. "He wanted me to take over the family ranch in Texas. I wanted to make my own way. Words were said that couldn't be taken back, and I've been riding ever since." He adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. And now you're headed to Cheyenne," he nodded. "Got a line on a job with a cattle outfit. They're driving a herd north next month, need experienced hands." "It must be lonely," Penelope ventured, always moving on. Something flickered in his eyes, a vulnerability quickly masked. You get used to it. Freedom has its advantages. They rode in companionable silence for a while, cresting a small rise that revealed a breathtaking view of the mountains in the distance. Dawson pulled his horse to a stop, and Penelope followed suit. "Never gets old," he said quietly, gazing at the landscape. "No matter how many places I've been, there's something about this country that gets under your skin." Penelope studied his profile against the backdrop of sky and distant peaks. In the golden afternoon light, with the wind ruffling his dark hair, he looked like he belonged here, wild and free and part of the land itself. "I can see why," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her then, his expression softening. "You're going to be all right here, Penelope. Silver Creek's rough around the edges, but there are good people if you know where to look, like you." The words escaped before she could think better of them. A shadow crossed his face. "I'm just passing through, remember. But Hank's decent, and Mrs. Fletcher, for all her fussing, has a good heart." He looked away, back toward the mountains. "You'll make your own place here." Something in his tone made her heart sink, a reminder that his help was temporary. In a week, he would ride away just as her family had, leaving her to face this new life alone. As if sensing her thoughts, he added, "But I'll make sure you're settled proper before I go, that's a promise." The ride back to town was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the livery to return the horses, Dawson pointed out the small room at the back where Hank sometimes let trusted employees stay. "If things work out, that might be an option down the road," he explained. "Save you the cost of the boarding house." "It seems I owe you a debt I can never repay," Penelope said as he helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "No debt," he insisted, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Just one traveler helping another." That evening, as Penelope sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, she felt a curious mixture of apprehension and hope. Tomorrow would bring her first day of truly independent work, the first step toward building a life of her own choosing. She heard the creak of the porch steps and looked up to see Dawson approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might like some company," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Thank you," she replied, making room for him on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gradually claimed the sky and stars began to appear one by one. "Tell me about your dreams," Dawson said suddenly. "Before all this, what did you want for your life?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. "I'm not sure anyone's ever cared what I wanted," she admitted. "But I suppose I've always loved horses. I used to imagine having a small ranch someday, raising horses like Maple." She smiled sadly. "It seems foolish now, not foolish at all," he countered. "Dreams keep us going when the trail gets rough. And your dreams?" "Beyond Cheyenne," he took a long sip of coffee before answering. "Been chasing something I can't quite name for years now. Freedom, maybe, or purpose," he shrugged. "Or maybe just running from the things I don't want to face." His honesty touched something deep within her. "We're not so different then," she said softly, both looking for a place to belong. Their eyes met in the dim light from the porch lamp, and for a breathless moment, Penelope felt a connection she couldn't explain, as if they'd known each other far longer than a single day. Dawson broke the spell, standing abruptly. "It's getting late. You should rest before your first day tomorrow." "Yes, of course," she agreed, rising as well. "I'll walk you to the livery in the morning," he offered. "Make sure Hank shows you everything proper." "I'd appreciate that." At the doorway, he hesitated. "You're stronger than you know, Penelope Porter. Remember that tomorrow." His words stayed with her as she prepared for bed, wrapping around her heart like a blanket against the cold uncertainty of her future. And if her dreams that night featured a dark-haired cowboy with kind eyes and steady hands, she kept that knowledge to herself when morning came. The next week passed in a blur of new experiences. Penelope's muscles ached from the unaccustomed labor at the livery, but she found unexpected satisfaction in the work. Hank Wilson, the gruff but fair-minded owner, seemed impressed by her willingness to learn and her natural way with the horses. True to his word, Dawson visited the livery each day, ostensibly to check on his own mount but clearly keeping an eye on Penelope's progress. He showed her how to properly clean tack, taught her the finer points of horse care that even she hadn't known, and smoothed over any rough patches with Hank. In the evenings, they often shared meals at the boarding house, where Penelope gradually learned more about the mysterious cowboy. He'd been born on a sprawling ranch in Texas, had fought briefly in the war as a very young man, and had spent the years since riding from Montana to Mexico, taking work wherever he could find it. He spoke little of his family beyond the rift with his father, but occasionally mentioned a younger sister he hadn't seen in years. On her 5th day at the livery, Penelope was brushing down Willow after exercising her when she overheard Hank speaking with Dawson outside the stall. "She's a natural with the horses," Hank was saying. "Didn't expect that from such a fine-looking woman." "Told you she knew her way around a stable," Dawson replied, a note of pride in his voice. "You riding out tomorrow as planned?" There was a pause before Dawson answered. "Supposed to. Got that letter confirming the job in Cheyenne. She'll be all right if that's what's worrying you. I won't let anyone trouble her." Another pause. "I know, appreciate you looking out for her, Hank." Penelope's hands stilled on the brush. Tomorrow, he was leaving tomorrow. She'd known it was coming, of course, but somehow the reality hit harder than expected. In just a few days, Dawson O'Malley had become her anchor in this strange new life, the one person she could truly talk to, the only one who knew her story. That evening, Mrs. Fletcher served a special dinner of roast chicken and apple pie, declaring it a farewell meal for Dawson. The boarding house's other residents, a retired schoolteacher, a young bank clerk, and an elderly widow joined them at the long table, creating an atmosphere of conviviality that only heightened Penelope's sense of impending loss. After dinner, Dawson asked if she'd walk with him to the livery so he could check on his preparations for the journey. The night was clear and cool, with a crescent moon hanging low in the sky and the distant howl of coyotes punctuating the cricket song. "Hank says you're doing well," Dawson commented as they walked. "He's considering giving you more responsibilities next month." "He's been very kind," Penelope replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everyone has." They reached the livery, but instead of going inside, Dawson led her to a small bench beside the building. "There's something I need to tell you before I go," he said, his expression serious in the moonlight. Penelope's heart quickened. "What is it?" He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "The day I found you in that stable, it wasn't coincidence. I don't understand. I was in the saloon that afternoon," he explained. "Overheard a man bragging about how he'd solved his stepdaughter problem by leaving her behind and taking her horse to boot. Said she'd learn her lesson about defying him." Penelope's breath caught. "Thomas was in the saloon, talking about me," Dawson nodded grimly. "He and another man were laughing about it, how you'd either have to marry that old shopkeeper after all or find yourself in a much worse situation." His jaw tightened. "Made my blood boil hearing him talk that way. I followed him when he left, saw him join your family's wagon train at the edge of town. They were already moving out despite the coming storm." "So you knew," Penelope whispered. "You knew I'd been abandoned when you found me." "I went looking for you," he admitted. "Checked every building in town before I thought to try the stable. Wasn't sure what I'd find, but I knew I couldn't leave you to the fate your stepfather had planned." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes as the full meaning of his confession became clear. "So all of this helping me find work, getting me clothes, introducing me to Mrs. Fletcher, it wasn't just kindness to a stranger. It was because you felt responsible." "At first, maybe," he acknowledged. "But Penelope—" He reached out hesitantly, then seemed to think better of it, letting his hand fall back to his side. "Getting to know you this past week, seeing your strength and determination that had nothing to do with responsibility. I admire you, more than I should, probably." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with unspoken meaning. "Then don't go," she said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Pain flashed across his features. "I have to. The job in Cheyenne is just another in a long line of jobs," she interrupted. "You said yourself you've been drifting for years. What's really driving you away?" Dawson stood abruptly, pacing a few steps before turning back to her. You don't understand. I'm not the kind of man who stays. I'm not built for settling down for the things someone like you deserves. Shouldn't I be the judge of what I deserve? Penelope rose to face him, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. You helped me start a new life, Dawson. You showed me I could stand on my own 2 feet, but that doesn't mean I want to stand alone. Penelope, he said, her name almost a plea. I've got nothing to offer but trouble. My past. I don't care about your past, I care about right now. About the man who couldn't bear to see a stranger mistreated, who taught me to groom a horse properly, who sits with me on the porch every evening just to talk. He shook his head, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. It's been a week, you barely know me. I know enough, she insisted. I know you're kind and honorable. I know you see me really see me when most people look right through me. And I know that when you ride out tomorrow, you'll take a piece of my heart with you whether you want it or not. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his expression a mixture of longing and regret. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. I never meant for this to happen, he said, his voice low and rough. Never expected to find someone like you in a place like this. Neither did I, she whispered. His hand rose to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch sending shivers down her spine. If I stayed, if we tried. I can't promise it would work. I don't know how to be anything but a drifter. I'm not asking for promises, Penelope said. Just a chance, stay another week, see what might happen if you stop running just for a little while. The internal struggle was plain on his face, years of solitary habits warring with something new and frightening. Finally, he spoke. 1 week, he agreed. But Penelope, if it doesn't work, then you ride to Cheyenne with a clear conscience, she finished for him. And I continue the life you helped me build here, no regrets either way. The relief in his smile made her heart soar. No regrets, he echoed. Later, as they walked back to the boarding house beneath the star-strewn sky, their hands brushed once, twice, before their fingers tentatively intertwined. It was a small gesture, but to Penelope, it felt like the beginning of something momentous, a journey as vast and promising as the western horizon itself. 1 week became 2, and 2 became a month. Dawson sent a letter to Cheyenne declining the cattle drive position, explaining he'd found reason to put down roots for a while. Instead, he took work with Hank at the livery alongside Penelope, his experienced hands and knowledge of horses proving invaluable as summer business increased. Silver Creek began to transform in Penelope's eyes. What had once seemed like a desolate outpost now revealed its charms. The way the morning light gilded the distant mountains, the friendly nods from shopkeepers who now knew her name, the simple pleasure of riding Willow across the open prairie with Dawson by her side. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on shared work and quiet conversations. Mrs. Fletcher watched their growing closeness with narrowed eyes but softening heart, eventually relaxing her strict rules enough to allow them to sit together on the porch long after the other boarders had retired. It was on one such evening, with fireflies dancing in the yard and the scent of lilacs heavy in the air, that Dawson first kissed her. The touch of his lips was gentle, almost reverent, his calloused hands cradling her face as if she were something precious and fragile. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he confessed, resting his forehead against hers. What took you so long? She teased, though her racing heart belied her light tone. His smile was tinged with lingering uncertainty. Been trying to convince myself I'm good enough for you. Dawson O'Malley, she said firmly, placing her palm against his cheek, you are the best man I've ever known. As summer deepened, so did their bond. Hank, seeing their dedication, offered them the chance to expand the livery business. With the railroad pushing ever closer to Silver Creek, he explained, there would soon be demand for more horses, perhaps even a stagecoach line. I'm getting old, he told them one evening as they sat in the stable office reviewing accounts. Been thinking about taking on a partner or two, someone to eventually take over the place. Dawson and Penelope exchanged a startled glance. You're offering us partnership in the livery? Dawson asked carefully. Got no family to leave it to, Hank replied with a shrug. And you two work well together. Got a good eye for horseflesh, both of you, different strengths that complement each other. He eyed them shrewdly. Course would make more sense if you were married, town might talk otherwise. The word married hung in the air like summer lightning, charged and momentarily blinding. We'll need time to consider, Dawson said after a long pause. It's a generous offer, Hank. Later, walking back to the boarding house beneath a canopy of stars, they discussed the unexpected proposition. It's everything I ever dreamed of, Penelope admitted. Working with horses, building something lasting. But, Dawson prompted, sensing her hesitation, but marriage, we've known each other barely 3 months. He stopped walking, turning to face her. Does that seem too fast or too slow? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean, he said, taking her hands in his, that sometimes it feels like I've known you all my life. And other times I wake up wondering if this is all some dream that's going to vanish with the morning light. His grip tightened slightly. I've never felt rooted anywhere, Penelope, not since I left Texas, but being here with you it feels like coming home to a place I never knew existed. Her heart swelled at his words. I feel the same way, she whispered, but marriage is such a huge step. Are you sure you're ready? Just a few months ago, you couldn't imagine staying in one place. I couldn't imagine you, he countered softly. You changed everything. The summer night wrapped around them, cicadas singing in the tall grass beyond the town limits. In the distance, a piano played faintly from the saloon, a wistful tune carrying on the gentle breeze. I'm not proposing right this minute, Dawson clarified with a small smile. Just thinking we might consider Hank's offer, take things one step at a time. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Penelope's chest. That sounds sensible. But Penelope, his voice dropped lower, intimate in the darkness, when I do ask, and it won't be because of a business arrangement. It'll be because I can't imagine living another day without you by my side. The promise in those words carried her through the following weeks as they negotiated terms with Hank, drawing up official partnership papers with the help of Silver Creek's only lawyer. The livery would remain under Hank's ownership for 2 years, during which time Dawson and Penelope would receive a percentage of profits while learning every aspect of the business. After that, they would have the option to buy him out completely, with Hank staying on as an advisor for as long as he wished. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of gold in the cottonwood leaves, Penelope moved from Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house to the small but comfortable room at the back of the livery. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows in town, but Hank's presence as chaperone and their obvious dedication to the business soon quieted the gossip. Dawson continued to room at the boarding house, though he spent most daylight hours working alongside Penelope. Their routine developed a comfortable rhythm. Breakfast together at the town's small cafe, long days of work interspersed with stolen moments of tenderness, and evenings spent planning improvements to the livery or simply enjoying each other's company. One crisp September morning, a familiar wagon rolled into Silver Creek, accompanied by the distinctive clop of a chestnut mare Penelope would have recognized anywhere. She was exercising Willow in the corral behind the livery when she spotted them. Her heart nearly stopped at the sight of her stepfather Thomas, her mother, and her 2 half-brothers climbing down from the very wagon that had abandoned her months before. And there, tied to the back, was Maple thinner than Penelope remembered but unmistakably her beloved horse. Dawson emerged from the stable just as Thomas approached the corral fence. He must have recognized the man from the saloon months ago, for his posture immediately stiffened, a protective hand coming to rest at Penelope's waist. Well, well, Thomas drawled, his gaze moving between them with calculated assessment. Looks like my stepdaughter landed on her feet after all, or should I say, landed in someone else's bed. Penelope felt Dawson tense beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. What are you doing here, Thomas? Is that any way to greet your family? Thomas asked with mock hurt. Your mother's been worried sick about you. Behind him, Penelope's mother stood with downcast eyes, looking older and more careworn than Penelope remembered. The sight sparked a complex mixture of anger and pity in her chest. You left me with nothing, Penelope reminded him coldly. Not even my own horse. A necessary lesson in obedience, Thomas replied, unrepentant. One that clearly didn't take, seeing as you found yourself a new protector. His eyes flicked dismissively over Dawson. Though I expected better than a stable hand, Dawson stepped forward, his voice dangerously calm. Mr. Porter, I suggest you state your business and move on. Miss Porter has built a good life here, one that doesn't include men who abandon women to teach them lessons. Thomas's face darkened. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. I've come to collect my stepdaughter. The shopkeeper's still willing to take her, despite her tarnished reputation. He's desperate enough for a young wife to overlook certain indiscretions. I'm not going anywhere with you, Penelope stated firmly. I'm a partner in this livery now. I have my own life, my own future. Partner, Thomas laughed derisively. Is that what he calls it? Girl, you're being used, same as always. Men like him don't marry girls like you. That's where you're wrong. The new voice belonged to Hank, who had approached unnoticed during the confrontation. The older man stood with his arms crossed, shotgun resting casually in the crook of his elbow. Miss Porter and Mr. O'Malley are indeed my business partners, Hank continued. Legal papers signed and witnessed. Whatever claim you think you have on her, it ended the day you left her behind in my town. Thomas's confidence wavered visibly. She's my responsibility by law. Her mother appears to have little say in your decisions, Dawson interrupted, nodding toward Penelope's mother, who still hadn't spoken. And the law generally frowns on abandonment. I wonder what the sheriff would make of a man who boasted in a public saloon about leaving his stepdaughter destitute during a storm. A tense silence fell. Penelope could almost see Thomas calculating his options, weighing his dwindling authority against the united front before him. I want Maple back, Penelope said into the silence. She's mine. Father gave her to me before he died. That horse is worth good money, Thomas protested. Not as much as your reputation in the next settlement, Dawson countered. Word travels fast on the frontier. Wouldn't want people hearing how you abandoned your own family, then tried to force your stepdaughter into marriage when that failed. The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Finally, Thomas spat on the ground in defeat. Take the damn horse, he snarled. She's been nothing but trouble anyway. Nearly lamed herself trying to run back here after we left. Penelope's heart constricted at the thought of Maple trying to return to her. She moved quickly to the wagon, untying her horse with trembling hands. Maple whickered softly, pressing her velvety nose against Penelope's cheek in recognition. Hello, old friend, Penelope whispered, tears blurring her vision. I've missed you so much. As she led Maple toward the stable, she paused beside her mother. You could stay, she offered quietly. You and the boys, there's room. Her mother finally looked up, revealing eyes dulled by years of submission. He's my husband, Penny, she said simply. My place is with him. The resignation in those words broke something in Penelope's heart, even as it strengthened her resolve. If you ever change your mind, you'll always have a place with me. She didn't wait for a response, continuing toward the stable with Maple following trustingly behind. Behind her, she heard Hank's firm voice telling Thomas it was time for him to move on, and Dawson's steady footsteps as he came to join her. Inside the dim stable, Penelope buried her face in Maple's mane, letting the tears flow freely. Dawson's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting gently on top of her head. You were magnificent, he murmured, standing up to him like that. I couldn't have done it without you, she replied, turning in his embrace to face him. Without the confidence you helped me find. That strength was always in you, he insisted. I just reminded you it was there. They stood together in the quiet stable, the reunion with Maple bittersweet in the aftermath of confronting her family. Through the open door, Penelope could see the dust rising as her family's wagon pulled away from Silver Creek, this time leaving her by choice rather than abandonment. Are you all right? Dawson asked, studying her face with concern. I am, she realized, somewhat surprised by the truth of it. For the first time in my life, I think I really am. Later that evening, after settling Maple in the stable beside Willow and watching the two horses get acquainted over the stall divider, Dawson suggested they take a ride out to the creek that gave the town its name. The September twilight painted the landscape in hues of gold and purple as they followed the meandering stream to a stand of cottonwoods where silver water tumbled over smooth stones. Dismounting, they spread a blanket beneath the largest tree, its leaves rustling gently overhead. Dawson produced a small bundle from his saddlebag: bread, cheese, and apples from the general store, along with a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. "What are we celebrating?" Penelope asked as he poured the wine into 2 tin cups. "Your reunion with Maple," he replied. "And your final freedom from your stepfather." They ate in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint fiery streaks across the western sky. The day's events had left Penelope emotionally drained but strangely peaceful, as if a chapter of her life had definitively closed. "I've been thinking," Dawson said after a while, setting aside his empty cup, "about what your stepfather said." Penelope tensed slightly. "He said many foolish things. About men like me not marrying girls like you," Dawson clarified. "He was wrong about that. But it got me thinking about what I do want." Her heart began to race as he reached into his pocket, withdrawing something small that glinted in the fading light. "This belonged to my mother," he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who finally made me want to stop wandering." His eyes, earnest and vulnerable, met hers. "I've been carrying it for 10 years, Penelope. Never thought I'd find a reason to take it out of my pocket." "Dawson," she whispered, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "I know it's not grand," he continued, the words tumbling out as if he feared losing his courage. "And I'm not a wealthy man. The livery partnership is a start, but it'll be years of hard work before we see real profit. But I promise you this: I'll work every day to be worthy of you, to build the life you deserve." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes as he knelt before her on the blanket, the ring held between his fingers catching the last rays of sunlight. "Penelope Porter, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life together right here in Silver Creek with horses and hard work and all the love I have to give?" Joy burst through her chest like wildfire. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Dawson O'Malley, I will marry you." His smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger was brighter than the first stars appearing overhead. When he kissed her, it was with a promise of forever sealed between their lips. "Ride with me forever," he whispered against her mouth. "Forever," she agreed, knowing that sometimes the greatest journeys were the ones that led you home. The wedding took place on a perfect October day, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the cerulean sky and the first hint of winter crispness in the air. Silver Creek turned out in full force for the occasion, the small church overflowing with townsfolk who had watched the romance blossom throughout the summer. Mrs. Fletcher surprised everyone by offering her parlor for the reception, her initial skepticism having transformed into wholehearted approval of the match. She even contributed her prized family tablecloth and best china for the celebration. Hank served as Dawson's best man, standing proud in a freshly pressed suit that had clearly been stored away for many years. The local schoolteacher, Miss Collins, stood as Penelope's maid of honor, having become a close friend in recent months. Penelope wore a simple ivory dress ordered from Denver, adorned with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her honey-brown hair was arranged in soft waves beneath a crown of autumn wildflowers gathered by the children of Silver Creek. As she walked down the aisle on Hank's arm, he having insisted on giving her away, she felt none of the uncertainty that had plagued her earlier life, only a bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Dawson waited at the altar, his dark eyes never leaving hers as she approached. He had trimmed his hair and beard for the occasion and wore a new black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. But it was the expression on his face, a mixture of awe, love, and disbelief at his own good fortune, that brought tears to Penelope's eyes. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their vows exchanged in voices that rang with sincerity. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson's kiss was both tender and possessive, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration lasted well into the evening with fiddle music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. As twilight descended, Dawson led Penelope away from the festivities toward the livery, where Willow and Maple stood saddled and waiting. "Where are we going?" Penelope asked, laughing as he helped her mount despite the constraints of her wedding dress. "It's a surprise," he replied with a mysterious smile. "Trust me, always," she answered simply. They rode in the gathering darkness, following a trail that wound up into the foothills beyond town. After about half an hour, they crested a small rise, and Dawson reined his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing toward a small cabin nestled among the pines, windows glowing with warm light. "What is this place?" Penelope asked, breathless with curiosity. "Our home," Dawson replied, "if you approve." As they drew closer, Penelope could see it was a solidly built cabin with a wide porch and chimney from which smoke curled lazily into the night sky. A small corral stood to one side, with a modest barn beyond. "Hank helped me find it," Dawson explained as they dismounted. "It belonged to an old trapper who passed last spring. 10 acres, good water, close enough to ride to the livery each day but far enough for privacy." He looked suddenly uncertain. "I know we talked about living above the livery eventually, but I thought it's perfect," Penelope interrupted, throwing her arms around his neck. "Absolutely perfect." Relief flooded his features. "Really, it needs work, especially inside, and the barn could use—" She silenced him with a kiss. "It's ours, Dawson, our very own place. I couldn't love it more." He swept her into his arms then, carrying her across the threshold as tradition demanded. Inside, she discovered he had prepared the cabin with care. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Fresh linens adorned the bed in the corner. And a small table was set with 2 place settings and a bottle of champagne, a wedding gift from Mr. Thompson at the general store. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley," Dawson murmured, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "Say that again," she requested, her hands rising to frame his face. His smile was tender in the firelight. "Mrs. O'Malley, my wife, my heart." Later, as they lay entwined beneath warm quilts with the fire burning low, Penelope traced the contours of her husband's face with wondering fingers. "What are you thinking?" he asked, capturing her hand to press a kiss to her palm. "That 6 months ago I thought my life was over when my family abandoned me," she replied honestly. "And now I realize it was just beginning." His arms tightened around her. "I thank God every day that I overheard your stepfather in that saloon, that I found you before anyone else did." "We found each other," she corrected softly, "and now we've found our home." The months that followed were filled with hard work and simple joys as they settled into married life. Days were spent at the livery, where business flourished under their combined care. Evenings were for their cabin, gradually transformed with Penelope's feminine touches and Dawson's handcrafted furniture into a true home. By spring, they had expanded the corral and begun breeding horses, starting with Maple, who was expecting a foal by one of the finest stallions in the county. The livery partnership with Hank proved more successful than any of them had anticipated, especially when the railroad finally reached Silver Creek, bringing new settlers and increased demand for quality horseflesh. One evening in early May, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of rose and gold, Penelope rested her head on Dawson's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, the old joke never failing to make her smile. "I was just thinking about the day we met," she replied. "How desperate I felt, how alone." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "And now I have everything I never dared to dream of." She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "And soon we'll have even more." His brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Dawson O'Malley?" she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Come December, you're going to be a father." The wonder that bloomed across his face was something Penelope knew she would remember until her dying day. He stared at her in disbelief before gathering her into his arms with exquisite gentleness, as if she had suddenly become fragile as spun glass. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We're having a baby," she nodded, happy tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Dr. Marshall confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Dawson dropped to his knees before her, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach as if he might hear evidence of the tiny life growing within. The gesture was so tender, so full of reverent awe, that Penelope felt her heart might burst with love for this man who had once claimed he wasn't meant for settling down. "Hello in there," he murmured to her belly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your pa. And I promise you this: you'll never know what it's like to be abandoned. You'll never doubt for a single day that you're loved beyond measure." Penelope cradled his head against her, running her fingers through his dark hair as the last light faded from the western sky and the first stars appeared overhead. In that perfect moment, the circle of their family felt complete, past wounds healed, present joys abundant, future bright with promise. Later, as they lay in bed discussing names and plans for the nursery, Dawson propped himself on one elbow to gaze down at her with an expression of profound gratitude. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I spent so many years riding from place to place, thinking freedom meant never having to stay anywhere too long, never letting myself get attached." He touched her cheek gently. "I had it all wrong. This is freedom, loving someone completely. Building something lasting together, putting down roots deep enough to weather any storm. No regrets about giving up the drifter's life?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. His smile was slow and certain in the lamplight. "Not a single one. You asked me once to ride with you forever, Penelope O'Malley. Turns out forever is just the beginning." As winter settled over Silver Creek, bringing deep snows and star-bright nights, the O'Malley cabin glowed with warmth and anticipation. Penelope's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her growing belly a source of fascination for Dawson, who spent each evening talking to their unborn child about horses and the vast Wyoming skies. On a crisp December morning, with snow blanketing the landscape in pristine white, Penelope awoke to the first pains of labor. By nightfall, after hours of effort attended by the town midwife and a nervously pacing Dawson, she gave birth to a healthy daughter with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit. They named her Hope, for all she represented in their lives: the promise of new beginnings, the healing of old wounds, and the boundless love that had transformed two solitary souls into a family bound by something stronger than blood or circumstance. As Dawson cradled his newborn daughter in the crook of his arm, gazing down at her with wonder etched on his face, Penelope watched them from the bed, exhausted but filled with a profound peace. Outside, snow fell gently from a velvet sky, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf called to its mate across the vast Wyoming wilderness. "Welcome home, little one," Dawson whispered to his daughter. "Your journey's just beginning, but don't you worry, your ma and I will be riding alongside you every step of the way." And in that promise lay everything Penelope had ever wanted, not just a horse to carry her forward, but a love to journey with her forever.